husband wants to end our relationship if I don't drop my guy friend. I can't believe this. Hey Reddit, this is my first post here, and I never thought I'd be in a situation like this. But here I am seeking advice. My husband Fred has given me an ultimatum: end my friendship with my childhood friend Josh, or end our marriage. It's a shock to me because Josh has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember, and Fred knows how important he is to me. Fred and I met in college, and it was like a fairy tale. He's charming, popular, and everyone loves him. I, on the other hand, am more reserved and not as outgoing as Fred. Despite our differences, we fell in love and got married. Fred's always been wary of my friendship with Josh, but I never thought it would come to this. Josh is like a brother to me, and asking me to choose between them feels impossible. I really need some advice on how to handle this situation. I love my husband, but I can't imagine my life without Josh either. Here's some backstory so you understand things more. My name is Haley and I'm 27 years old. I've been married to my husband Fred, who's 26 years old, for about 2 years now. Our first date was a night to remember. Fred had suggested we go to a cozy cafe downtown, and I was thrilled. I spent hours picking out the perfect outfit, wanting to make a good impression. When I arrived, Fred was already there, waiting with a warm smile. The cafe was charming, with dim lighting and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. We settled into a quiet corner and began talking. Fred was a great conversationalist, and our discussions flowed effortlessly from one topic to the next. I found myself opening up to him in a way I hadn't with anyone else. He listened attentively, nodding along and offering thoughtful responses. I was struck by how easy it was to talk to him, how comfortable I felt in his presence. As the evening wore on, Fred reached across the table and took my hand. The simple gesture sent a wave of warmth through me. I knew then that there was something special between us, something worth exploring further. When it was time to leave, Fred walked me to my door. Before saying goodnight, he leaned in and kissed me softly on the cheek. It was a sweet, tender moment that left me longing for more. On our second date, Fred surprised me with tickets to a local comedy show. I was thrilled. I loved comedy, and it showed me that Fred was thoughtful and attentive to my interests. We laughed the entire night, and I felt like we were truly connecting on a deeper level. After the show, we went for a walk in the park. It was a beautiful night with the stars shining brightly overhead. We sat on a bench talking for hours about everything and nothing. I felt like I could be myself around Fred, that I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. As the night came to a close, Fred walked me back to my car. Before we said goodnight, he pulled me into a gentle embrace and kissed me softly. It was a moment filled with warmth and affection, and I knew then that I was falling for him. Our second date solidified my feelings for Fred. I knew that he was someone special, someone I wanted to build a future with. And as we parted ways that night, I remember wondering where our relationship would take us next. On our third date, Fred planned a romantic evening at a cozy Italian restaurant in town. He knew I loved Italian food, and he wanted to surprise me with a special night out. As we sat at our table, the soft glow of candlelight creating a warm ambiance, I couldn't help but feel grateful to have him in my life. We talked about everything from our favorite foods to our dreams for the future. Fred was a great listener, and he made me feel like my thoughts and opinions truly mattered to him. It was a refreshing change from past relationships where I often felt unheard. After dinner, Fred suggested we take a walk along the riverfront. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the sound of the water flowing gently by was soothing. We walked hand in hand, enjoying each other's company and the peacefulness of the night. As we stood by the water, Fred pulled me close and kissed me under the moonlight. It was a magical moment, and I felt like I was living in a fairy tale. In that moment, I knew that Fred was someone I could see myself falling in love with. Our third date was a turning point in our relationship. It was when I realized that Fred was not just a great guy, but someone I could truly see a future with. After several months of dating, Fred and I decided to take the next step in our relationship and move in together. It was a big decision, but one that felt right for both of us. Fred had been getting more involved in freelancing, and his income was growing steadily. He was shouldering the bills, and we both felt that sharing a home would not only strengthen our bond, but also make financial sense. I remember we spent weeks looking for the perfect place, and when we finally found it, we were thrilled. The apartment was spacious and filled with natural light, with a cozy living room and a beautiful view of the city skyline. It felt like our own little piece of paradise. As we settled into our new home, we divided up the chores and made plans for the future. Fred was passionate about his work, and I was excited to see where his freelancing career would take him. I was working a low-income job, but Fred's success inspired me to pursue my own passions and dreams. Living together was a wonderful experience. We laughed, we cooked together, and we made memories that I will cherish forever. Fred's support and love were unwavering, and I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be. Fred's proposal was a moment I'll never forget. It was a beautiful evening, and we were out for a romantic dinner at our favorite restaurant. As we finished our meal, Fred took my hand and looked into my eyes with so much love and sincerity. He started talking about our journey together, from the day we met in college to our adventures in freelancing and living together. His words were so heartfelt, and I could feel my heart racing with excitement. Then he got down on one knee, took out a ring, and asked me to marry him. I was speechless, overwhelmed with emotion. Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded, unable to find my voice. Fred slipped the ring onto my finger and we embraced, knowing that our lives were about to change forever. It was a magical moment. Fred had always been my rock, and in that moment, I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with him. I remember our wedding day like it was yesterday. I remember walking down the aisle. My heart was filled with joy and anticipation. This was the moment I had been dreaming of since Fred and I first met in college. He stood at the altar looking so handsome and nervous, his eyes locked on mine. I reached him and we exchanged smiles that spoke volumes of our love. The ceremony was a blur of emotions, but I remember the feeling of warmth and love that surrounded us. When Fred said his vows, tears welled up in my eyes. His words were so sincere, so full of love and promise. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart, promising to stand by him through thick and thin, to love him unconditionally for the rest of my days. After we exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, the joy was palpable. We kissed, sealing our vows, and the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. The reception was a whirlwind of laughter, dancing, and celebration. Surrounded by our friends and family, we felt truly blessed. In the 2 years since our wedding, everything seemed to be going great, except for one recurring issue: my friend Josh. Fred didn't like Josh, and the feeling was mutual. Despite my efforts to bridge the gap between them, it seemed impossible. Josh harbored a strong dislike for Fred, often mocking him for being a trust fund baby. While it was true that Fred came from a wealthy family, he wasn't reliant on his trust fund, thanks to his steady, well-paying job at his dad's company. I think Josh just disliked the fact that Fred had it in life really easy due to his family's money. Josh and I had come from low-income families, so I really didn't blame him much. Fred's disdain for Josh stemmed from his belief that Josh had a crush on me. However, I had known Josh since childhood, and he had never expressed any romantic interest in me. Fred insisted that he could sense it in Josh's body language and behavior, and this led to tension between the two. This dynamic made things challenging, as I valued both my marriage to Fred and my long-standing friendship with Josh. As time went on, the tension between Fred and Josh seemed to escalate. Every interaction between them became strained, with Josh becoming more vocal about his disdain for Fred, and Fred growing increasingly suspicious of Josh's intentions. I found myself caught in the middle, desperately trying to maintain peace between two important men in my life. One evening, Fred and I had plans to attend a mutual friend's party. I was excited for us to spend some quality time together, but my excitement was short-lived. As soon as we arrived, I noticed Josh across the room chatting with some friends. I tried to act normal, but Fred's demeanor changed instantly. He became cold and distant, and barely acknowledged anyone, including me. I approached Josh, hoping to ease the tension, but our conversation quickly turned sour. He accused Fred of being controlling and manipulative, claiming that he was trying to isolate me from my friends. I was taken aback by Josh's accusations and tried to defend Fred, but Josh's words had already planted seeds of doubt in my mind. The rest of the evening was a blur. Fred and I barely spoke, and when we finally left the party, the tension between us was so much. Fred also often complained that Josh was rude to him, and I didn't do much to stop it. I tried to keep things peaceful, but it was tough. There was this one time at a dinner party when Josh made a snarky comment about Fred's job, hinting that he only got it because his family was rich. Fred was really upset, but I brushed it off, thinking Josh was just joking. Looking back, I realized I should have said something to Josh. Things got worse when Josh started suggesting that I should think about leaving Fred. He'd say things like I deserved better. At first, I thought he was just looking out for me, but Fred saw it as a threat to our relationship. I tried to balance my friendship with Josh and my marriage to Fred, but it started getting harder. It was also clear that Josh had strong feelings about Fred and me getting married. When he found out about the proposal, he was furious. He accused Fred of being manipulative and insisted I should leave him. He stormed off, clearly upset. Josh tried to involve himself in the wedding planning, but it caused tension. He would shut down Fred's ideas and try to take control, but I made it clear that Fred and I had the final say. During Fred's bachelor party, which I had to persuade Fred to invite Josh to, things got even more complicated. I later found out from Fred's best friend that Josh had tried to get Fred to cheat on me by arranging for a stripper. Fortunately, Fred refused, but it was a troubling revelation. On our wedding day, Josh's behavior reached a new low. He arrived drunk, which led to him vomiting on Fred's suit and causing a scene. His actions were embarrassing and disrespectful. During his speech, which was already slurred and incoherent due to his intoxication, Josh said rude things about Fred. It was clear that he had no regard for our special day or for Fred. His behavior was a stark contrast to the joy and celebration we had hoped for on our wedding day. Fred also often feels that Josh crosses boundaries in his interactions with me. He recalls a particular incident at a dinner party where Josh made a suggestive comment towards me, causing Fred to feel uncomfortable and disrespected. Despite Fred's discomfort, I brushed off the comment, saying Josh was just joking. Another instance that Fred finds unsettling is when Josh unexpectedly showed up at our house late at night, asking to speak with me alone. Fred felt this was inappropriate and expressed his concerns to me, but I defended Josh, saying he was going through a tough time and needed someone to talk to. Fred also mentions how Josh often invades our personal space, like when he borrowed Fred's car without asking or showed up unannounced at our weekend getaway. These actions leave Fred feeling like Josh doesn't respect our relationship or boundaries. I, on the other hand, see these incidents differently. I view Josh as a close friend who is sometimes a bit impulsive but means well. I believe Fred is overreacting and that Josh's intentions are harmless. This disconnect in our perspectives leads to tension and arguments between Fred and me, as Fred struggles to feel secure in our relationship with Josh's presence looming over us. One incident that also comes to my mind was when we as a group decided to go out for food. I couldn't help but notice the tension brewing between Fred and Josh. Fred had chosen a pricey restaurant, and when the bill came, he offered to pay for everyone. However, throughout the dinner, Josh made mocking remarks about Fred, poking fun at his appearance and calling him names. He even called Fred a human Ken because he has blonde hair and blue eyes. I felt uncomfortable, but I didn't want to escalate the situation, so I stayed quiet. When it was time to settle the bill, Fred paid for everyone except Josh, leaving him with a substantial amount to pay. Josh was visibly angry, calling Fred petty and insisting that he was just joking. But the damage was done, and Fred's actions spoke volumes about his feelings towards Josh. There was also this one time during a group trip while Fred and I were still dating. Josh caused a stir by insisting that Fred should pay for him because, according to him, Fred is rich. Fred stood his ground, refusing to foot Josh's bill, which led to a heated argument before Josh finally paid for himself. The situation escalated when we were choosing rooms. Josh insisted on either staying in a room with Fred and me or a room with just me because he claimed he didn't feel comfortable with me staying in a room alone with Fred. I found this request absurd and shocking. Fred is my boyfriend, and it was completely inappropriate for Josh to suggest such a thing. I firmly rejected all the options Josh presented, making it clear that his request was unwelcome and unnecessary. The final breaking point was the incident at the pub. We had all gone out drinking as a group, and the night was going quite well, especially as there was no bickering between Josh and Fred. However, Josh asked to talk to me privately and pulled me aside. Josh then asked to stay with us because of financial difficulties, and I agreed without consulting Fred first. When I brought it up to Fred later, he was understandably upset. He refused to let Josh stay, asserting his authority over the household finances. I was angry at Fred's refusal and his assertion that it was his house, not ours. We were married, and I felt he should have considered my friendship with Josh. However, I was also hesitant to tell Josh about Fred's decision because I knew he would be upset. Before I could find a solution, Josh showed up at our house the next day. Fred was furious and demanded that Josh leave. The situation escalated, and Fred threatened to call the police. It was a tense moment, and Fred finally gave me an ultimatum. Choose between my friendship with Josh or our marriage. I am torn. I love Fred, but Josh has been my friend for so long. Fred left the house, leaving me to make a difficult decision. I tried calling Fred multiple times, but he wouldn't pick up. Josh also sent me a text blaming me and calling Fred manipulative. Fred's trust issues with Josh are really starting to take a toll on our marriage. From my perspective, Josh is just a friend, but Fred sees him as a threat. He's always questioning my loyalty and believes that Josh is trying to break us apart. I understand Fred's concerns to some extent. Josh has made some disrespectful comments in the past, and I can see why Fred might feel uneasy about our friendship. But at the same time, I don't think Josh has any ulterior motives. We've been friends since we were kids, and he's never shown any romantic interest in me. Fred's lack of trust is causing a lot of tension between us. He's always questioning my interactions with Josh and gets upset whenever I spend time with him. It's frustrating because I feel like I'm constantly having to defend my friendship. I've tried to reassure Fred and include him in my interactions with Josh, but it doesn't seem to help. He's convinced that Josh is trying to sabotage our relationship, and nothing I say or do seems to change his mind. I love Fred, and I want to make our marriage work, but I don't know how to resolve this issue. It feels like we're stuck in a cycle of mistrust and misunderstanding, and I'm not sure how we can move forward. Any advice would really be appreciated. Update. Hey Reddit, a lot of y'all probably remember me as the girl who came on here asking for advice because my husband gave me an ultimatum to either pick our marriage or my friendship with Josh. It's been about 4 months since I came here seeking advice about my husband's ultimatum regarding my friendship with my childhood friend Josh. Many of you suggested that my husband Fred might have valid concerns about Josh's behavior. You pointed out that Josh's actions seemed suspicious, and some even suggested that I hadn't always supported Fred enough. After much reflection, I realized there might be some truth to these observations. When Fred returned home a few days later, I was deeply apologetic. I expressed my remorse to him, and we had a lengthy conversation about boundaries and other important matters. I realized that my friendship with Josh had been one-sided and toxic. He often borrowed money from me and Fred. Despite mocking Fred for being wealthy, I realized that he must have been jealous of Fred. I also finally realized that truly there were numerous times where Josh had been weird to me. His behavior had caused friction in my marriage, and I began to see that Fred's suspicions were valid. I just didn't want to acknowledge them then because Josh had been such a longtime friend of mine. I apologized profusely to Fred, but he expressed doubts about our marriage's future. However, he suggested that we try therapy before considering divorce. He said if we tried therapy for a few months and it didn't work out, then we could divorce. I was relieved that he was willing to give our relationship a chance. I then reached out to Josh to meet up and discuss the situation. Josh and I met at a pretty cool restaurant, and his first question was surprising. "Are you guys done?" I asked for clarification, and he inquired if we were getting a divorce. I assured him that we were not, and that we were working on our marriage through therapy. This seemed to disappoint Josh, and it dawned on me why Fred had been so insecure about our friendship. I asked Josh why he was disappointed, especially since he knew how much I loved Fred. That's when Josh confessed that he had a crush on me since we were kids. He expressed his frustration that I never noticed his feelings and implied that I chose Fred because of his wealth. I was furious at this accusation. I reminded Josh that he had never once confessed his feelings to me in all the years we'd known each other, even during my single days. I also found it disrespectful for him to suggest that I married Fred for his money. Josh and I argued back and forth. He insisted that Fred was controlling and trying to isolate me from my friends. He claimed that one day I would see Fred's true colors and be left all alone, with him refusing to help me. I found this accusation irritating. I argued that Josh was just jealous of Fred because Fred embodied everything Josh wished he could be. This only seemed to anger Josh more, and he called me a gold digger, pointing out that I wouldn't benefit from Fred's wealth anyway due to our prenuptial agreement. I felt overwhelmed and decided to leave the restaurant. I paid the bill and left, telling Josh that it would be best if we didn't contact each other for a while. Josh seemed remorseful and wanted to apologize, but I refused to listen. I told him our friendship was over and that I should have sided with Fred from the start. My marriage with Fred was my priority, and there was no way I would choose Josh over him. In therapy, Fred and I delved into our relationship dynamics, addressing issues that had been lingering beneath the surface for years. We talked about trust, boundaries, and communication, or the lack thereof. Fred expressed his feelings of insecurity and inadequacy, stemming from his belief that Josh had feelings for me. He also opened up about his fear of losing me and his frustration at not feeling supported in our relationship. For my part, I acknowledged my role in the situation, admitting that I had prioritized my friendship with Josh over my marriage at times. I realized that I had failed to set boundaries with Josh and had not fully understood the impact of his behavior on Fred. Therapy helped me see that my actions had contributed to Fred's feelings of betrayal and hurt. Together, Fred and I worked on rebuilding trust and improving our communication. We learned healthier ways to address conflicts and express our needs. We also discussed our future together and what we wanted from our marriage. Therapy wasn't easy. There were moments of tension and discomfort as we confronted difficult truths about ourselves and our relationship. But ultimately, it brought us closer together. We emerged from therapy with a deeper understanding of each other and a renewed commitment to our marriage. So I guess that's it, everyone. Thank you for all the advice. I realize now that I should have ended things with Josh a long time ago. It's clear that prioritizing a friendship over my marriage was a mistake. Thank you all for listening and offering your insights.